I'm Eon, Dean of Cyberspace. I'm an avatar in the virtual world. I've undertaken the task of representing online poker. And I'm eager to talk with you because I've been feeling oppressed by the way in which the prosecutorial world, the law world, the executive world has encroached upon me. I represent the millions of people who benefit from engaging in online poker. I represent the companies that benefit from providing the service. I represent the individuals who founded those companies. I represent the potential benefit of poker for all who could potentially benefit from it. And I find myself in a situation in which I'm more or less accepted throughout the world. But in the United States, I am prosecuted. And I am prosecuted under circumstances which have led me to feel abused. I was hoping that I would be able to talk about this with you, Harvey Silverglade, as someone who might think of defending me, and with you, Alex Whiting, as someone who might offer some guidance as to what the norms of prosecution are that I will face. And you, Matt, to help me make some of the choices I'm clearly going to have to make as time goes forward. So, Harvey, may I start with you? I come to your office. I sit across the desk from you. I say, I'm interested in hiring your services. What do you say to me?
With respect to this problem?
I guess you want to ask me what my problem is.
Yes. Well, I guess I should ask you what you're doing. I take it, so far all that I know is that you are involved in a company that conducts online poker all around the world, and either is about to do it, want to do it in the United States, or have begun to do it in the United States, and have gotten some kind of threat that if you don't cease and desist, you'll be indicted. And I take it the question is whether conducting online poker operations in this country violates some federal criminal statute. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that is correct. I think that is correct. Alex, here's what's happened. Tell me if you think this makes sense. The federal government seems to have adopted a policy hostile to all forms of online gambling, and seems to have done that without any particular authorization from any particular congressional source. It just seems to be an executive policy. Is this plausible?
Well, it's if taken strictly what you say, it's not plausible because the executive can't prosecute anybody without some sort of law or some sort of statute and some sort of authority to do so. However, I think in a different sense, it is very plausible that the executive branch takes existing statutes and applies them to a new situation, such as online poker, without some statement of Congress to go ahead and do that. And that is very plausible. That's something that happens in the executive branch all the time, for better or for worse. The executive has a broad discretion to set policy with regards to prosecution and priorities, which is how it has to be. I mean, how it has to be under our current system. You could imagine a different system, but the Congress the way things work is Congress passes broad statutes with broad authority to the executive, and the executive, it couldn't possibly prosecute every crime that is on the books or every person. And so they have to pick and choose, have to set priorities, have to choose in terms of seriousness of crimes or areas of crimes. And so it's very possible that for better or for worse, the executive branch has on its own focused in on online gambling.
I
as
ask
an area.
a question of Alex.
Please.
Before the executive sought to put this new wine into the old bottles, did they try to get Congress to amend the statutes to specifically cover online gambling, or did they just assume that they had the authority to prosecute based on statutes written before there was such a thing as online gambling?
Well, I think that the fraud and crime come in infinite forms, and particularly frauds, which you're interested in.
I'm very interested.
And you write about. You talk about how there's you commit 3 felonies a day. I think there are 3 new frauds dreamed up a day by people who are interested in committing fraud. So it is impossible to write a statute that would cover with specificity every possible fraud. If you did that and you came up with 500 frauds, the next day somebody would come up with the 501st fraud. So statutes are in this area. They are written to try to be specific enough to tell people that it's to give them enough warning about what is a crime, but broadly enough so that they can cover all kinds of ranges of new types of activity.
On the other hand, in my experience, the prosecutor generally will say, we can do this through this statute, and if we're wrong, the courts will tell us that we're wrong. Isn't that a fair statement of how the prosecutor thinks? In terms of fraud, the bribery statute, for example, I don't want to get into the esoterics of it, but there's all kinds of permutations of that, and instead of saying we're not going to prosecute, the idea is they say we're going to prosecute, and if there's a limit put on it, somebody else will tell us what the limit is.
Well, I don't think that's completely fair. I think that prosecutors do limit themselves to some extent. If they look at conduct that is and it's clearly not covered by the statute, they're not just going to go after it and say, well, somebody will stop us.
But that's
if
the
we're
problem.
wrong.
The point is, and that's Harvey's point.
Well,
the
that's
statutes are vague enough to allow, and as you say, this fraud in particular is broad enough so that you can cover it. You can cover it by 4 or 5 different statutes, and that's it.
So let's do it for me, Alex. You're the prosecutor. Just imagine. You're the junior in the office. You've been somehow, assigned the case? Is that how it would come to you?
Yeah, well, it could happen in a lot of different ways, but let's say I end up with the case. And the first thing I would do...
Who creates the case?
Well, cases can be created in a lot of different ways. The typical model is that cases are investigated by investigative agencies, by the FBI, by the DEA, even by state agencies working with federal prosecutors. But more and more, federal prosecutors get involved in the investigative process. So they're involved very early on in the process. So it may be that an FBI agent comes and says, look, we have observed this problem of internet gambling going on. It's a lot of people in Massachusetts are doing it, are involved in it.
Right here in River City.
And so we want to take a look at this. So the question would be, well, let's look at the statutes. Let's see if it is applied, if it is covered by the statute. And now this is a little different because this is not, at least as I understand it, not a fraud. We're not talking about a fraud which could be covered by one of the fraud statutes. So it's going to be a relatively technical question about whether one of the existing statutes covers this kind of conduct. And there is a statute, from the little I know about this area, there is a statute
hold on,
called the Wire Act.
But just back up. I'm so interested in just how this gets started, right? Imagine that I am a publicly traded company on the London Exchange that has been offering online services in the form of allowing people to play poker all over the world. How does a decision get made to prosecute my company?
Well,
Somebody's got to come to you with that company.
right. No, right. I mean, let's take it back one step, because this sort of a thing is, I think, going to be made in the Justice Department, in Main Justice in Washington, that we're going to start taking a look at online gambling. We don't like it. We think it's criminal. We think it violates the certain statutes. So we're going to take a look at it. So that kind of a decision, that kind of a priority is going to come from Washington to look at these sorts of activities. And then...
Isn't that ultimately a political decision then? I mean, isn't that what you're saying?
Yeah,
That's what you're
absolutely,
saying.
absolutely. All criminal law enforcement is political. I mean, there's no escaping that. I mean, I agree with you that, for example, that drug enforcement is. I think the federal government has gotten too much involved in drug enforcement. That's a political decision. It's made by Congress. It's made by the federal government, by the executive branch. Criminal law enforcement is politicized. There's no
But Alex,
escaping that.
so what you're saying is that what I'm up against is that someone high up in Washington apparently makes a decision that's not about me specifically. It's apparently about online gambling or online poker or online something.
Right.
And passes the word down to, eventually, to your office, saying, we want you to go after online gambling. It's then up to you to look and see if you can find the statutes and who to pick out to investigate and so forth.
Well, presumably, when the decision's made up here, this is not just some abstract policy decision that, I'm John Ashcroft or I'm Alberto Gonzalez, I don't like gambling, and therefore go, send this prosecutors to go attack it. Some decision is made that there is some statute which applies, and it's a violation of federal criminal law, and that it has, and it is, there's an important federal interest in going after it, that it's causing certain type of harm, and that it's serious. Now, you may disagree with those judgments, and I probably would in this case, but those are the sorts of decisions that are being made. I mean, it's not just some sort of personal distaste. They're decisions that are made at a kind of policy level on whether the crime has occurred and whether the statute covers it. And once that's been made, then it goes down to the office to start making cases against individual companies. And so then it, of course, does become about the company, about the individual, about whether that conduct, and then the individual prosecutor is going to have to make the determination on these facts. I get this company is doing this. Does this fit the statute? Is this a crime? And I have been in cases. I have been in arguments about that in the Department of Justice about some very serious, prominent cases. Sometimes I win them, sometimes I lose them. But about whether these facts make out a crime.
But there are also, every administration has its priorities set.
Right.
Every attorney general comes in and sits down and decides what priorities of the office are. And sometimes those priorities focus on a certain industry or certain kinds of practice. And my experience is what happens is the investigators go out and they forage to see if they can find violations, because the boss has said, this is our priority, we're going to be do health fraud. And if the attorney general says we're going to do health fraud, before you know it, all kinds of practices which previously had not been thought to be criminal, suddenly they are exposed to a kind of analysis that asks the question, they're making an awful lot of money, they must be doing something illegal, let's see if we can fit these within a pharmaceutical statute. So I can tell you that almost any practice by a pharmaceutical company can be fit into some or other federal criminal statute, and that's my problem. You start out with your conclusion and you work back, and it's a very dangerous way of going about enforcing the law.
I tell you what